Here's a guy who should have been a main eventer, but somehow got lost in the shuffle. Bryan Adams, better known as Crush, had everything: legitimate amateur wrestling credentials, impressive physical presence, and the kind of real toughness that made other wrestlers respect him. Yet his career tells a different story. From beloved babyface to controversial heel to underutilized enforcer, Crush's journey through WWF and WCW shows us how even the most talented wrestlers can get caught up in bad timing and politics. Today we're looking at what really happened to one of wrestling's most underrated performers. Bryan Adams came from a background that most wrestlers could only dream of having. While WWF eventually sold him as this friendly Hawaiian giant, the real story behind Bryan Adams was way more interesting than what made it on television. Bryan Keith Adams wasn't some tourist board creation. He was born and raised in Kona, on Hawaii's Big Island in 1964. This wasn't just another wrestling gimmick where some guy from Ohio pretends to be exotic. Adams grew up surrounded by Hawaiian culture where respect and toughness weren't just wrestling concepts, they were everyday values. Standing 6 feet 6 inches, weighing close to 300 pounds by his late teens, Adams dominated multiple sports in high school. He played football, basketball, and ran track, but wrestling became his main focus. Hawaiian high school wrestling was no joke back then. The islands produced some seriously tough competitors who understood that strength training and conditioning were life or death in competition. Adams learned early that size alone wouldn't cut it. You needed technique, endurance, and mental toughness to survive. Here's where it gets interesting, though. While other wrestlers were making up backstories about being from mysterious foreign lands, Adams had the real deal. Wrestling promoters in the 1980s were so used to manufactured characters that Adams had to prove his authenticity repeatedly. Some guys actually thought he was just another mainland wrestler with a tan, trying to work an angle. This honestly made him tougher in the long run. After high school, Adams joined the Air Force, where he spent 4 years learning discipline that most wrestlers never experience. Military training gave him structure, but more importantly, it's where he really developed his boxing skills. The Air Force had serious boxing programs, and Adams took full advantage. He learned how to throw proper punches, how to take hits, and how to stay composed under pressure. These weren't skills you could fake in the ring. Other wrestlers could tell immediately if someone had real fighting experience or not. But here's the part that really set Adams apart from other big men in wrestling. In 1986, he managed to get training sessions with Antonio Inoki in Japan. This wasn't some tourist wrestling camp. Inoki's dojo was where serious athletes went to learn legitimate wrestling technique. Most American powerhouses relied purely on their size and basic moves. Adams spent months learning submission holds, technical counter wrestling, and the kind of ring psychology that separated good wrestlers from great ones. Inoki's strong-style training philosophy focused on blending different fighting styles. He taught Adams how to use his boxing background alongside traditional wrestling holds. More importantly, he showed him how to work stiff without actually hurting his opponents, something that would become Adams' calling card throughout his career. Japanese wrestling culture emphasized respect for the business and for your opponents. Adams absorbed these lessons completely. The combination of his authentic Hawaiian upbringing, military boxing discipline, and Japanese technical training created something unique in American wrestling. Adams wasn't just another big guy who could throw people around. He understood ring psychology, he could work with smaller technical wrestlers, and he had the kind of legitimate toughness that earned respect in locker rooms. Other wrestlers knew immediately that this guy was different from the usual bodybuilder types who showed up with no real athletic background. Territorial promoters started hearing about this Hawaiian kid who could actually wrestle. Word spread that he was professional, easy to work with, and could make other wrestlers look good while still being believable as a threat. In an era when most wrestling characters were completely manufactured, Adams represented something authentic. His Hawaiian background gave him natural babyface appeal, but his technical skills and legitimate toughness meant he could adapt to different roles as needed. This combination of real athletic credentials, cultural authenticity, and professional training made Adams stand out during a time when wrestling was becoming increasingly cartoonish. While other promoters were creating characters like evil dentists and garbage men, Adams offered something that felt genuine. He had the size that looked impressive on television, the skills to have competitive matches with anyone, and the background story that didn't require fans to suspend disbelief. This foundation would serve Adams well as he prepared to test himself against the toughest competition the Territorial system had to offer. Adams started making his mark in Pacific Northwest Wrestling in the late 1980s, working under the name American Ninja. This wasn't some cartoon character. Promoters wanted to capitalize on his legitimate martial arts background and that technical training he got in Japan. The ninja gimmick let him show off his submission skills while still being this imposing big man that crowds could take seriously. Pacific Northwest Wrestling was perfect for Adams because they appreciated workers who could actually wrestle. This wasn't about flashy entertainment. It was about putting on competitive matches that looked real. Adams formed a tag team called the Wrecking Crew with another hard-hitting wrestler, and they became known for their stiff matches and professional attitudes. Veterans respected them because they could make matches look brutal without unnecessarily injuring opponents. That's a tough balance to strike, especially for guys their size. The breakthrough came when Adams started working singles matches against top-level competition. His 1990 Pacific Northwest Heavyweight Championship win was huge because he beat some seriously tough guys to get there. The competition in that territory was no joke. Guys like Scott Norton were already making names for themselves as legitimate tough guys. Norton was another one of those wrestlers with real athletic credentials, so when Adams could hang with him in competitive matches, people took notice. What impressed veterans most was how Adams used his Japanese training. In PNW matches, he could switch from pure power moves to technical submission counters that caught opponents completely off guard. He'd start throwing his weight around like any other powerhouse, then suddenly lock in some complex hold that smaller technical wrestlers used. This versatility made him incredibly useful to promoters who needed someone to test rising talent against different styles. Adams built a reputation as someone who could work with literally anyone and make them look good. Promoters loved this because it made booking easier. You could put him in there with a veteran who needed to look strong or with some young rookie who needed to learn how to work with big men. Adams adjusted his style for each opponent. With smaller guys, he'd sell more and let them use their speed. With other big men, he'd have hard-hitting slugfests that looked like real fights. The Territorial promoters started using him to test rising stars and establish credibility for new wrestlers. If someone could have a good match with Adams, that meant they probably had what it took to succeed at higher levels. He became known as one of those reliable hands who could make or break someone's reputation based on how well they worked together. That's actually a pretty important role in wrestling, even though fans don't usually notice it. Adams was also developing his psychology during this time. He learned how to build matches, how to work crowds, and how to make stories make sense in the ring. Japanese training taught him that every move should have a purpose. Every reaction should mean something. American crowds responded differently than Japanese crowds, so he had to figure out how to adapt those lessons for West Coast audiences. By 1990, word was getting around the wrestling business about this Hawaiian guy who was tearing it up in the territories. He had the look that television wanted, the skills that other wrestlers respected, and the professional attitude that promoters loved working with. Veterans were telling their friends in other companies that Adams was ready for the next level. His Territorial success proved he had everything needed for the big leagues: the size, the skills, the work ethic, and most importantly, the ability to adapt to whatever role was needed. National promoters were starting to hear his name mentioned in conversations about up-and-coming talent. WWF scouts were already watching Pacific Northwest Wrestling for new talent, and Adams had made their list of wrestlers worth pursuing. What none of them could have predicted was that his first major opportunity wouldn't come as a singles wrestler, but as the solution to one of wrestling's most legendary tag teams facing an unexpected crisis. When Demolition needed a third member in 1990, most fans had no idea they were about to witness wrestling history. The legendary tag team was facing a serious problem that WWF couldn't ignore anymore. Bill Eadie, who played Axe, was dealing with health issues that made it tough for him to keep up with the demanding WWF schedule. His heart condition was getting worse, and he'd been briefly hospitalized after a severe shellfish allergy reaction. Doctors were telling him he needed to slow down. WWF had a choice: either break up one of their most popular tag teams or find a way to keep Demolition going. That's where Bryan Adams came in. Management had been watching his work in the territories and liked what they saw. Here was a guy who had the size and look to fit with Demolition's intimidating image, but he also had the technical skills to work with top-level competition. More importantly, he had that professional attitude that made him easy to work with backstage. WWF decided to bring him in as Crush, the third member of Demolition. Joining an established, beloved team meant Adams had to prove himself to skeptical fans immediately. Demolition had been together for years and had this incredible chemistry that fans loved. Axe and Smash were like wrestling brothers. They knew each other's moves, they had this natural timing together, and their whole presentation was perfect. Now here comes this new guy, who fans had never seen before, trying to fit into something that already worked great. WWF used the Freebird rule to make this work. This rule meant that any two members of a three-man group could defend the tag team championships. Adams got thrown right into championship matches against the best tag teams in WWF, which gave him instant credibility. He actually debuted as a substitute in a title defense, so fans immediately saw him as championship-level competition. The matches against the Rockers really established Adams' WWF credibility. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty were at the top of their game during this period, and they could make anyone look good if that person could keep up with them. Adams proved he could hang with their fast-paced style while still bringing that power element that Demolition was known for. The chemistry was there right away, which surprised a lot of people who expected it to take months for Adams to find his rhythm. His work with the Hart Foundation was even more impressive. At SummerSlam 1990, Demolition lost their tag team titles to Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart in a match that showed Adams could perform on the biggest stages. Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart were technical wrestlers who demanded precision from their opponents. You couldn't just muscle your way through matches with them. You had to understand ring psychology and know how to tell stories. Adams showed he could do both. What made Adams special was how his different style actually complemented Smash while maintaining Demolition's intimidating presence. Smash was more of a straight-ahead power wrestler who relied on basic but effective moves. Adams brought more technical elements and submission holds that caught opponents off guard. Teams preparing for Demolition suddenly had to worry about different types of attacks, which made the matches more unpredictable. Behind the scenes, though, WWF was already planning Demolition's gradual phase-out. The company wanted younger, more athletic tag teams that fit better with their changing direction. Teams like the Rockers and Hart Foundation represented where WWF wanted to go. More athletic, more technically skilled, better looking for television. The politics got complicated when WWF started pushing Legion of Doom as their new monster tag team. Road Warrior Hawk and Animal had similar looks to Demolition but were younger and had this incredible energy that crowds went crazy for. Basically decided they didn't need two teams filling the same role. This created an awkward situation for Adams. He'd just joined this legendary team, proven himself against top competition, and was starting to find his groove. But Demolition's era was ending, and management wanted to move in a different direction. The team's dissolution would force Adams to reinvent himself completely. His Demolition run gave him instant credibility and taught him how to work WWF's unique style. But now, he needed to figure out what came next as a singles wrestler. In early 1991, after Demolition wound down, they repackaged him as Kona Crush, a proud Hawaiian babyface who represented the island's warrior spirit. This wasn't just another Hawaiian stereotype. WWF was smart enough to realize they had something genuine on their hands, which was pretty rare during this era of cartoonish gimmicks. The creation of Kona Crush happened because WWF needed new babyfaces who could connect with crowds. Vince McMahon and his creative team saw Adams' Hawaiian heritage as something they could build around without making it feel fake. Unlike other ethnic characters who were often portrayed as foreign heels or comedy acts, Crush was presented as this authentic Hawaiian who took pride in his culture. Adams got to wear traditional Hawaiian shirts, use island-themed entrance music, and talk about his background in promos. In an era where wrestlers were garbage men, tax collectors, and evil dentists, fans weren't sure if this real character would connect with audiences. Most characters were so over the top that fans expected everything to be exaggerated. When Crush showed up talking about Hawaiian culture and representing the islands with pride, some people didn't know what to make of it. Wrestling fans were used to gimmicks being completely fake, so a genuine character felt different. His signature cranium crunch. Finishing move was a vice-like head squeeze that visually matched Crush in his power. Adams would grab his opponent's head with both hands and squeeze until they passed out or gave up. It looked devastating when a guy his size applied it, and it made perfect sense for someone called Crush. The move was simple enough that crowds could understand it immediately, but brutal-looking enough that it seemed like it could actually end matches. His size made him an instant crowd favorite because he looked like he could legitimately hurt people if he wanted to. Standing 6'6" and weighing close to 300 pounds, Crush had that imposing presence that made kids in the audience believe he was unstoppable. But unlike other monster heels, he was using his size to help people and fight bad guys. That combination of physical intimidation with a good guy personality worked really well for family audiences. The momentum really started building when Crush defeated Repo Man at SummerSlam 1992 at Wembley Stadium. The London audience responded well to his straightforward babyface character, and the clean victory established him as someone who could deliver in big match situations. This win was supposed to be his coming-out party as a singles star. The WrestleMania 9 program with Doink the Clown showed both his potential and the booking challenges he faced. The storyline involved Matt Bourne's evil clown character using mind games and distractions against Crush. At WrestleMania 9, the match featured the infamous double doink spot, where a second doink interfered from under the ring, costing Crush the victory. Losing there damaged his singles momentum just when he was starting to connect with audiences. His involvement in the USS Intrepid Body Slam Challenge on July 4, 1993, demonstrated how close he came to major storylines. WWF brought several wrestlers to challenge the massive Yokozuna, and Crush came closest among all the challengers to actually slamming him. But his back gave out during the attempt, which was both a storyline moment and a real injury that would sideline him for months. Everything changed when Adams suffered that serious back injury at the peak of his popularity. The injury was legitimate and required several months of recovery time, which completely derailed his momentum as a babyface. He was connecting with crowds, his merchandise was selling well, and he was getting pushed toward bigger matches. Then suddenly he was gone while his back healed. WWF Creative saw his absence as an opportunity rather than just a setback. Instead of having Crush return as the same character, they decided to use his injury time off as the foundation for a storyline that would shock wrestling fans and test whether Adams could generate real heat as a villain. When Crush returned in fall 1993, WWF pulled off one of the most controversial character turns in wrestling history. After months away recovering from his back injury, fans expected their beloved Hawaiian babyface to come back the same way he left. Instead, WWF Creative had cooked up something that nobody saw coming. The storyline they created was that during his time off, Crush had been brainwashed by Japanese sympathizers who convinced him that America had betrayed him and his Hawaiian heritage. This angle tapped into real-world tensions in ways that generated serious heat from crowds. The idea that a proud American like Crush could be turned against his own country by foreign influences struck a nerve with wrestling audiences. WWF wasn't just creating a simple heel turn. They were playing with genuinely sensitive political themes that people had strong feelings about. The storyline got even more complex when they revealed that Mr. Fuji had been the one manipulating Crush during his recovery. Fuji was already managing Yokozuna, the massive Japanese sumo wrestler who was being pushed as WWF's top monster heel. Having Crush align with them created this anti-American faction that felt genuinely threatening to fans. What made this turn so effective was how it completely reversed Crush's character dynamics. The same guy who had been representing Hawaiian pride and American values was now talking about how America had used and discarded him. His promos became bitter and angry instead of proud and positive. The physical transformation was striking too. Instead of colorful Hawaiian shirts, Crush started wearing all black and scowling at crowds who used to cheer for him. The Randy Savage feud became the centerpiece of this new character direction. and their friendship made the betrayal feel genuinely personal. Savage had been one of Crush's allies before the heel turn, which made their eventual conflict more meaningful than typical wrestling feuds. These two had history together. They'd worked as partners, and fans remembered when they were friends. When Crush started targeting Savage specifically, it felt like a real betrayal instead of just another wrestling angle. Their matches together showed both men's storytelling abilities in ways that surprised people. Savage was obviously an experienced main event performer, but Crush proved he could hang with that level of psychology and drama. Their encounters weren't just big man versus smaller technical wrestler. They told stories about friendship, betrayal, and revenge that crowds got invested in. The WrestleMania X Falls Count Anywhere match was the peak of their program and a career highlight moment for Adams. Falls Count Anywhere matches were still pretty rare in WWF, so this felt like a big deal. The stipulation let both guys use their strengths: Savage's agility and high-flying moves, and Crush's power and intimidation. They fought all around Madison Square Garden, using the environment in creative ways that kept fans engaged throughout. This angle reflected WWF's willingness to use controversial international politics for heat generation. Vince McMahon and his creative team weren't afraid to touch on sensitive subjects if they thought it would get emotional reactions from crowds. The anti-American angle with Crush and Yokozuna was designed to make people genuinely angry, not just boo because they were supposed to. The program tested whether Crush had true main event potential in ways his babyface run never did. As a face, Crush was popular but kind of limited in terms of storyline possibilities. As a heel aligned with major foreign threats, he was positioned as someone who could theoretically challenge for championships and be taken seriously as a threat to top babyfaces. The heel turn proved Crush could generate real emotion from crowds and work compelling programs with established stars. Fans genuinely hated him in ways they rarely hate wrestlers anymore. His promos were convincing, his matches told good stories, and he looked like a legitimate threat to the wrestlers fans cared about. But it also revealed he lacked the star power for sustained main event runs. While the Savage feud worked great, Crush struggled to maintain that level of heat and interest when moved to other programs. He could play his role perfectly, but he didn't have that special charisma that made people want to see him as a long-term top heel. After the Savage program ended, WWF management seemed unsure what to do with him next, by slotting him into Ted DiBiase's million-dollar corporation as an enforcer. This stable of wrestlers that DiBiase was supposedly paying to do his dirty work made sense on paper. A rich guy hiring muscle to handle his problems? Crush fit the muscle role perfectly, but the storylines never really went anywhere interesting. He'd show up, beat up whoever DiBiase wanted beaten up, then disappear until the next week. This role signaled WWF moving him back toward a utility position rather than a sustained main event push. The various character shifts during this period were confusing for everyone involved. One month Crush would be this serious enforcer type. The next month he'd be doing comedy bits with other corporation members. Creative inconsistency and outside pressures combined to stall his momentum completely. The anti-American heel character that worked so well during the Savage feud got watered down until it didn't mean anything anymore. Despite his obvious abilities, Crush seemed trapped in a cycle of promising starts and quick endings. He'd get involved in a new storyline that seemed like it might lead somewhere, then suddenly it would just stop and he'd move on to something else. This happened over and over again. Fans who followed his career could see the pattern developing, but there wasn't much anyone could do about it. His transition back to face character happened almost overnight and caught everyone off guard. WWF decided they needed him to be a good guy again, so they basically just stopped having him do heel things and hoped fans would forget about all the anti-American stuff. No big storyline explanation, no dramatic moment where he saw the error of his ways. He just started acting like a babyface again. Fans struggled to keep up with these changes because they didn't make any story sense. Backstage politics and WWF's changing direction affected his booking in ways that fans never saw. The company was going through major changes during this period. New wrestlers were coming in, old storylines were getting dropped, and creative directions changed based on whatever Vince McMahon was interested in that week. Crush got caught up in all this chaos without having enough star power to protect himself from the constant changes. Everything got much worse in March 1995 when Adams was arrested in Hawaii on charges related to steroids and an illegal handgun. This wasn't just some minor legal trouble. These were serious charges that made national news. The arrest happened while WWF was already dealing with their own steroid scandals and legal problems. Having one of their wrestlers get arrested for the exact same stuff they were getting investigated for was a major headache for management. The charges included possession of steroids and an illegal firearm, which were exactly the kinds of things WWF was trying to distance themselves from publicly. Adams got caught with enough stuff that prosecutors could make serious cases against him. The legal troubles weren't something that would just go away quietly. This was going to be a long public court process that would keep making headlines. Because of the arrest and ongoing legal proceedings, WWF couldn't credibly present him as a top babyface figure, and this limited storyline opportunities immediately. They couldn't really push someone who was facing these kinds of charges as a major role model. They also couldn't just ignore the situation and hope it would go away. Management had to figure out how to handle Adams's character while he was dealing with court dates and lawyers. The legal problems created this weird situation where Adams was still under contract and still showing up for shows, but WWF couldn't really do anything meaningful with him storyline-wise. They kept him around doing basic matches and simple angles, but nothing that would put him in a spotlight that might remind people about his legal troubles. Adams eventually served jail time, which took him off television completely for several months. When wrestlers disappear from programming without explanation, it usually kills whatever momentum they had built up. Fans forget about them, storylines move on without them, and their spots get filled by other people. But sometimes real-life problems can become unexpected creative opportunities if handled correctly. When Crush returned in 1996, WWF did something unprecedented. They turned his real legal troubles into a wrestling character. After dealing with his court cases and legal problems for over a year, Adams came back as Jailbird Crush, complete with prison tattoos, a leather jacket, nose chain, and this tough guy attitude that reflected what he'd actually been through. This wasn't just another gimmick change. WWF was literally using his criminal charges as the basis for his new persona, with Clarence Mason as his sleazy lawyer manager. This controversial angle pushed boundaries by using real criminal charges for entertainment value in ways that seem crazy by today's standards. The Attitude Era was just starting to take shape, and WWF was willing to try anything that might get reactions from crowds. Having a wrestler whose character was based on actual drug and weapons charges was exactly the kind of edgy, early Attitude Era content that leaned on reality. It was risky as hell, but it fit with where wrestling was heading. The Jailbird Crush gimmick reflected his actual legal issues and the emerging Attitude Era perfectly. Instead of trying to hide from Adams's problems, WWF decided to lean into them completely. His entrance music got darker, his ring gear looked more intimidating, and his promos were about how prison had changed him into someone you didn't want to mess with. The character worked because it felt real, because it basically was real. His work with Clarence Mason showed how the biker convict persona fit the era's darker themes. Mason was this sleazy lawyer character who represented various heel wrestlers, so having him work with someone who actually needed legal representation made sense. Their segments together had this authentic feel because Adams really did know what it was like to deal with lawyers and court dates. The storylines wrote themselves. The involvement with Farouk's Nation of Domination created complex racial dynamics that WWF probably didn't think through completely. The Nation was this black militant group, and having a white ex-convict associate with them sent some weird messages about prison culture and racial politics. Adams fit the enforcer role well, but the optics were questionable. Wrestling fans noticed these things, even if creative didn't always consider the implications. His evolution into the Disciples of Apocalypse represented WWF's chaotic gang wars experiment that nobody really understood. The DOA were supposed to be this motorcycle gang that rode to the ring on actual motorcycles and acted like tough bikers. Adams fit right in with his leather jacket and prison tattoos, but the whole concept was confusing. WWF had multiple competing factions: the Nation of Domination, the Disciples of Apocalypse, Los Boricuas, all fighting each other in these complicated storylines that fans couldn't follow. Multiple faction warfare left talented wrestlers like Crush completely lost in the shuffle during this period. Adams would show up, have some random fight with members of other gangs, then disappear for weeks. There was no clear direction for any of these characters. The gang wars concept was one of those ideas that sounded good in theory, but fell apart in practice. Having multiple ethnic and cultural groups fighting for territory was supposed to reflect real urban conflicts, but it came across as stereotypical and poorly planned. The gang warfare confusion failed to create a single clear star from any of these factions. Instead of elevating wrestlers like Adams, the complicated booking diluted everyone's characters and made it impossible for fans to get invested in anyone's storylines. Adams got caught up in all this mess without having a clear character motivation or storyline direction. Things got even more complicated when backstage turmoil started affecting WWF's creative direction. After the Montreal Screwjob controversy at Survivor Series 1997, Adams left WWF partly in protest of the backstage unrest and his frustrating position in the company. The Jailbird era showed WWF's willingness to experiment with controversial content, but it also revealed how real-life issues could limit a wrestler's ceiling in unexpected ways. Adams had this authentic tough guy character that should have worked perfectly for the Attitude Era, but the execution was sloppy and the booking was inconsistent. He looked the part and could work the gimmick convincingly, but the storylines around him were a mess. These frustrations would soon lead Adams to make a decision that would completely change his career trajectory during wrestling's most competitive period. Adams jumped to WCW in 1997 and immediately got slotted into a position that made sense. WCW needed big, intimidating guys for the New World Order, and Adams fit that role perfectly as an enforcer alongside Scott Norton. No complicated backstory needed, no weird character quirks, just be big, tough, and help the NWO cause problems for everyone else. Norton was another legitimate tough guy who understood what Adams brought to the table. They both had real athletic backgrounds, they could work stiff without hurting people, and they looked like guys you wouldn't want to mess with in real life. While WCW offered opportunity, it also meant competing for attention in an overcrowded roster that was getting more bloated by the month. The NWO had become this huge, crowded faction with dozens of members, which made it hard for mid-card additions like Adams to stand out unless they were already established stars. Adams and Norton were positioned as the muscle, but so were a bunch of other guys. The roster was packed with former WWF wrestlers, established WCW stars, and random additions that didn't always make sense. His work during the Monday Night Wars showed how his reliable presence helped fill out NWO storylines, even when he wasn't featured prominently. Monday Nitro was 3 hours of television every week, and WCW needed bodies to fill all that time. Adams could work with anyone. He showed up prepared, and he never caused backstage problems. That made him valuable even when he wasn't getting major storylines. He'd have matches that kept crowds engaged and helped other wrestlers look good. The Kiss Demon situation perfectly illustrated WCW's chaotic booking during this period. Adams was originally supposed to be the Kiss Demon character based on the rock band Kiss, complete with face paint and theatrical entrance. He was even introduced in a segment but gave up the gimmick before actually wrestling in it. The whole concept was confusing and didn't really go anywhere, but it shows how WCW was throwing random ideas at wrestlers without much planning. Other bizarre WCW concepts kept popping up that Adams had to deal with. The company was throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck, and most of it didn't work. Random celebrity appearances, confusing faction changes, storylines that started and stopped without explanation. Adams just rolled with all of it and did his job professionally. The formation of Kona Crush with Brian Clark turned out to be one of the best decisions WCW made regarding Adams. Clark was another big guy with legitimate toughness, and together they created this team that looked absolute. Kona Crush felt like a natural pairing in ways that a lot of WCW's manufactured teams didn't. Their 2 WCW Tag Team Championship reigns proved that when WCW actually focused on something, they could book Adams effectively. The title runs weren't just random decisions. Kona Crush looked like champions and defended the belts against quality competition. Their matches with other top tag teams were some of the better work happening in WCW's tag division during this period. These championship wins showed Adams could still perform at a high level when given proper direction. Changing. Storylines got dropped or altered without warning, and wrestlers never knew if their current program would still exist next week. Even when Adams and Clark were having good matches and drawing decent reactions, they couldn't count on consistent booking. His professionalism earned respect even as WCW's booking became increasingly erratic during the company's final years. Other wrestlers knew they could count on Adams to show up ready to work and make whatever storyline they were given look as good as possible. Veterans appreciated working with him because he made their jobs easier. WCW gave Crush consistent work and championships, but the company's instability limited everyone's potential during those final years. The Monday Night Wars were winding down, ratings were dropping, and financial problems were getting worse. No matter how good someone was in the ring, they couldn't overcome the company's bigger issues. As WCW crumbled around him, Adams started looking for opportunities that would actually appreciate what he brought to the table. Japan became the place where Adams finally received the professional recognition his skills deserved. While American promotions struggled with how to use him, Japanese wrestling culture immediately understood what he brought to the table. The wrestlers there appreciated his hard-hitting style and professional approach in ways that American promoters never seemed to grasp. Japanese wrestling valued technical ability and legitimate toughness over politics and backstage maneuvering. His work with NWO Japan showed how Japanese promoters appreciated what Adams represented as a foreign wrestler. The NWO concept worked differently in Japan than it did in America. Instead of being this massive, bloated faction with dozens of members, NWO Japan was more focused and selective about who they included. Adams fit their vision perfectly. Legitimate toughness, combined with professional wrestling skills. Japanese fans could tell immediately that he wasn't just another American muscle guy trying to get by on his size. The early Antonio Inoki training he'd received back in the 1980s suddenly became incredibly relevant again. That technical foundation gave him a huge advantage over other foreign wrestlers who relied purely on power moves. Japanese wrestling emphasized submission holds, technical counters, and ring psychology that most American big men never bothered learning. Adams could hang with smaller, more technical wrestlers because he understood the fundamentals that Inoki had taught him years earlier. His adaptation to Japanese wrestling's demanding style required completely changing his approach to matches. American wrestling was becoming more entertainment-focused and less about pure wrestling ability. Japanese wrestling still demanded that matches look competitive and believable. Adams had to work stiffer, sell more convincingly, and tell better stories in the ring than he'd been required to do in America for years. The success he found in All Japan Pro Wrestling really showcased how veterans recognized his abilities. Working as part of Kona Crush with Brian Clark, Adams proved he could excel in Japan's competitive environment. Their All Japan Tag Team Championship win wasn't just another title. It represented validation from one of wrestling's most respected promotions. The older Japanese wrestlers who ran that company had seen hundreds of foreign wrestlers come and go. They could spot immediately who had real skills and who was just trying to coast on their reputation. Japanese promoters valued his reliability and ring psychology over flashy gimmicks or backstage politics. In America, success often depended on who you knew and whether management liked your character concept. Japanese promoters cared more about whether you could work good matches consistently and help draw money. Adams excelled at both of those things in ways that American promotions had never fully appreciated. The matches he had in Japan were different from anything he'd done in America. The pace was different, the expectations were higher, and the crowds reacted to technical wrestling moves and hard-hitting action over storyline drama. Adams discovered he was actually better at that style of wrestling than the sports entertainment approach that dominated American promotions. This international success provided validation after years of American underutilization in ways that probably meant more to Adams than main event matches would have. Having Japanese wrestling veterans respect your work was a big deal in the wrestling business. It proved that his skills were real and that American promotions had simply failed to use him properly. The championship wins and consistent bookings showed that when promoters focused on his abilities rather than trying to create complicated characters, Adams could deliver at the highest level. The experience taught Adams what he was actually capable of when given the right opportunities and opponents. Working in Japan showed him that his technical training and professional attitude were assets that some promotions valued more than others. Japanese wrestling culture proved that he'd been right all along about his abilities. But even this career renaissance couldn't last forever. During a match where Kronike faced Keiji Muto and Goldberg, Adams suffered a serious spinal injury that would force him to make difficult decisions about his future. The injury was severe enough that continuing to wrestle at the level Japanese promotions demanded became impossible. After finding the respect and success that had eluded him for so long, Adams faced the reality that his in-ring career was coming to an end. His final WWE run in the early 2000s brought him back as part of a reconstituted Demolition with Barry Darsow. But this was a short nostalgia spot rather than a major second act. The attempt to recapture magic from over a decade earlier didn't connect with modern audiences who had moved on to different wrestling styles. Behind the scenes, Adams was dealing with prescription medication issues that plagued many wrestlers from his era. Years of injuries had left him managing chronic pain with multiple medications. On August 13, 2007, Adams died at age 43 from an accidental interaction of prescription medications including buprenorphine, muscle relaxants, and benzodiazepines that together depressed his respiratory system. Adams's career illustrates two key wrestling truths. First, he was a reliable, adaptable worker who could change roles from babyface to heel and fit many factions successfully. Second, his story shows how timing, backstage politics, and real-life issues like injuries and legal problems can limit even talented wrestlers' ceiling regardless of their abilities. What's your favorite Crush moment? Wembley, the Savage match, or his Japan work? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more underrated wrestler deep dives. Until next time.